You are looking at the last images of a young Guatemalan woman, which were captured in October 2020. That day, the girl left her house very early to go about her duties. But she never made it to work. Her disappearance immediately raised alarms, and a search against the clock began. But after her body was found, the investigation pointed to someone very close to her, revealing a story of betrayal that shocked the entire country. If you want to know everything that happened, stay with me until the end of the video. Hello everyone, how are you? My name is Lesma. I hope you're doing very well. As always, I'm very happy to be here with you for another day and very grateful that you are watching me from wherever you are. Today we have a case that happened in Guatemala, that of Litzy Cordon. Join me to see all the details. Litzy Amelia Cordon Guardado was born on May 30, 2000 in a small community in Guatemala. When she was very young, her mother Carla made the decision to move to the United States for financial reasons, and Litzy grew up with her father. But her maternal relatives were also very present in her life. On top of that, her mother made sure to keep in touch with her almost daily. She would send her photos and even on some occasions packages with clothes, gifts, and personal items. Carla's efforts to be close to her daughter meant that despite the distance, the bond between them remained very strong. Mind you, several people who knew Litzy commented that during her adolescence, she did really resent the absence of her mom. But since she had so many good people by her side and the woman did communicate with her constantly, well, all of this was eased. In short, Litzy was a girl like any other. They describe her as a very sociable, very fun young woman and also with a very good heart. But since she had so many good people by her side and the woman did communicate with her constantly, well, all of this was eased. In short, Litzy was a girl like any other. They describe her as a very sociable, very fun young woman and also with a very good heart. When she finished high school, she decided to go to college to study social work, a career that for many people who knew her, fit her like a glove because she was always looking to help her community and cared about the less fortunate. By 2020, Litzy had a very set routine. She was an almost independent young woman. She helped her family in a business they owned, which was a grocery store specifically owned by her grandmother. From Monday to Friday, she spent her time there from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. After that, she would go home to do her college homework or study a bit. The weekends were dedicated to going to classes at the educational institution she attended, and besides that, she also had time to spend with her boyfriend, a guy around her age named Ferdi. It seemed that at that moment, Litzy's life was very peaceful and like that of any other girl in her 20s. In addition to this, she had just inherited a property from her family and it was under construction. So during many afternoons, she would also go to this site to see how the construction was going and also to keep an eye on the crops she had around where the house would be. In the end, as I say again, it seemed that her life was very peaceful. Litzy was very excited about this new house, but at that moment she didn't imagine that this land, this house, and this construction she was so excited about would end up being the breaking point in her life. And this house was surrounded by neighbors as they usually are. These neighbors were some of her relatives, specifically on her father's side. And among these was a cousin named Kevin Manolo Rivas Cordon. They didn't have an especially close relationship, but they had known each other since they were very young and occasionally crossed paths at family gatherings, community activities, or saw each other on the street. In the end, it seemed they got along reasonably well and hadn't had any major problems. So that brings us to Monday, October 5th, 2020. The day before, Litzy had spent time with her boyfriend and he had dropped her off at an aunt's house. That day, Litzy was expected to go to the store, but she didn't show up. She had to open, and on top of that, she had to stop by the construction site, as was her custom, and water some plants. The last that was heard of her was that at 6 in the morning she had left home on her motorcycle. And after this, the hours began to pass and her family had no news of her. As the hours went by, her family realized that something wasn't right. And since Litzy had such a set routine, they had to go to the authorities to file a missing persons report. The Isabel Claudina alert was quickly activated, and they began searching for Litzy. Several people also thought of Ferdi, the young girl's boyfriend, as a possible suspect. This young man was interviewed. He admitted that he had seen Litzy the day before, but said he had dropped her off, as we know, at her aunt's house and that he hadn't seen her since. The family's desperation began to grow more and more, reaching a boiling point when the young girl's motorcycle was found abandoned. But everything was about to get worse, as they later received a call that would completely change the course of the case. At around 8 in the evening on that October 5th, Litzy's grandmother's phone rang. And looking at the screen, she noticed something that gave her a bit of relief. It seemed to be a call coming from her granddaughter's number. But that relief lasted only a few seconds. On the other end of the line, she didn't hear Litzy's voice, but that of an apparently unknown man. The individual demanded a ransom of 5 million quetzales in exchange for returning Litzy alive. This figure was completely outrageous. It would be around $650,000 today, and the young woman's family didn't have it. With this, their worst fears were coming true. Litzy wasn't lost, she hadn't run off with someone, but someone was holding her against her will. Immediately, despite the shock, the family began to think about how they could get this amount of money. As I said, for them it was too outrageous, they didn't have all that cash. So they started moving to see what they could do, if they could sell or borrow something. But things, well, didn't end in the worst way. They didn't even have time to figure out or think about how to gather this amount of money, because the next day, Litzy's body was found. The young woman was lifeless in a vacant lot very close to the house she was building. She showed obvious signs of violence, and according to the first forensic reports, she had lost as a result of neck compression. She was only 20 years old. But aside from the pain and all the speculation that might have been going on in the case, there was something that didn't add up for the family or the investigators. Just a few hours earlier, they had received a call demanding a ransom. Why had they taken Litzy's life so quickly? Why hadn't they let her family, well, gather the money, or maybe make another call and offer a different amount? It really didn't seem like they wanted to carry out a real negotiation. They began to think that maybe it had just been a call to throw them off. And so, while investigators tried to reconstruct what happened, Litzy's loved ones tried to process the harsh loss. Thus, the demand for answers grew stronger and stronger. Family and friends gathered to say their final goodbyes, and the ceremony was marked by pain and disbelief. They really didn't understand who would want to hurt the young girl. For the community, violence was becoming a problem, so as a result of this, about 350 people participated in a peaceful protest to demand answers and ask that the case not go unpunished.
Estoy aquí porque quiero justicia, quiero que me ayuden, quiero que investiguen, quiero que encuentren responsables. No se puede quedar así.
Everyone dressed in white and carried candles and signs in memory of the young woman. Meanwhile, investigators made quiet progress after receiving a tip that would change the course of the case. And a key part of this investigation was the security cameras. Because, thanks to these recordings, they were able to reconstruct Litzy's final movements. In the footage, there was something that really caught their attention. While she was riding her motorcycle, a white car was following her very closely. The license plate was visible, and it didn't take long for investigators to identify the driver of the vehicle. To everyone's surprise, it was Litzy's cousin Kevin. The fact that the prime suspect was within the family caused a huge shock, not only in the community, but also among the loved ones of both the young woman and this boy. But security camera footage of a car following someone wasn't enough for the authorities. They had to have more evidence. Otherwise, they couldn't arrest Kevin, and if they did, the case could fall apart. So they started trying to analyze many more things. Something that also helped a lot in the investigation was locating both Kevin's phone and Litzy's SIM card. It was determined that these devices had been together for a long time on that day, the day of the young girl's disappearance. And on top of that, it was also determined somehow that Kevin had put Litsy's SIM card into his cell phone, and it was from this device that he had made the call to the young woman's grandmother. With all this, the case was coming together more and more, and authorities could now point to Kevin as the prime suspect. With all this, 13 search warrants were executed at different properties, and Kevin's vehicle was searched. During these searches, more evidence was found linking him directly to the case. And finally, on December 10, 2020, he was arrested. The investigation took some time, but the findings seemed to point more and more in the same direction. Supposedly during the searches, several firearms and nearly 300,000 quetzals, which would be equivalent to about $40,000, had been found at Kevin's house and other properties. The source of the money was never publicly explained, but over time, various hypotheses emerged about its origin, including a possible connection to Litsy's case. Even so, although this case is already closed, no hypothesis was ever confirmed by investigators. But beyond what had been found in the searches and what evidence there was against Kevin, there was a question in the air. What had caused this boy to attack his own cousin? A cousin who, although we said wasn't his best friend and they didn't have the closest relationship, was someone he had grown up with, a person of his own blood. On top of that, many family members began to describe Kevin as someone who didn't have the personality to take someone's life. So the reasons were becoming less and less clear. The main hypothesis the authorities had was the family inheritance. But not because they wanted to take it from Litsy or because this had been a point of contention between them before the young woman received it, but simply that Kevin, seeing that his cousin's house was being built, that she already had this land, and that on top of that she was studying and had a very peaceful life, could have fallen victim to his own envy, and because of this he decided to eliminate her, to take her life. For many people, he had simply acted in a very horrible way, because he wanted to be like Litsy or wished he had what she had. There was also talk that it had simply been an act of pure cruelty, but in the end, it's a question that remains in the air, because Kevin, despite being arrested, never offered a convincing explanation or gave the reasons that had led him to act that way. Be that as it may, on January 4, 2021, he was bound over for trial and formally charged with the crimes of kidnapping and murder. In addition, a judge ordered him to remain in pre-trial detention. Months later, in May of that same year, a key hearing was scheduled to determine if the case would go to trial or not. However, the process began to experience some delays. On one occasion, the hearing had to be suspended because the prison system had failed to transfer Kevin on time. On another, because his lawyer hadn't shown up. And so, as the months went by, there were administrative problems, changes in defense, and various procedural issues. This kept postponing the progress of the case over and over again. It was then that one of the most striking episodes during the process occurred. On June 12, 2021, Kevin's father and brother, along with 3 other men, lost their lives in an armed attack carried out at a ranch. This event shocked public opinion and gave rise to a lot of speculation. For people, specifically on social media, this had been an attack against Kevin's family as a form of revenge against him. They thought that maybe the maternal relatives or the other paternal relatives, for example of Litsy, had decided to take justice into their own hands. But authorities investigated this thoroughly and determined that Litsy's murder and the murder of Kevin's relatives had nothing to do with each other. Mind you, up to the day we are making this recording and this investigation, no arrests have been made for those murders. Obviously that case hasn't been solved, and many people still think that maybe it has something to do with Litsy's case. But as I said, authorities determined that this was not the case. Be that as it may, the process against Kevin continued, and in the end, on June 18th, the last pending hearing was held. Once this hearing was over, and with the prosecution having presented all the elements of the investigation, it was determined that indeed the case should move to the next stage, and it was decided that the trial would start on June 9, 2022. But before this happened, on October 3, 2021, several family members organized a tribute to Litzy on the first anniversary of her murder. During the event, in addition to several written messages and gifts left in her memory, several people expressed their gratitude to the community for the huge support the family had received. Litzy's father recalled that the only person detained, the only suspect, was their relative, but that even so, there could be more people involved in the crime, and they were not going to rest until everyone responsible was behind bars. And this was precisely what the family had always sought: justice. However, when the scheduled date for the trial finally arrived, the process stalled again. First, it was postponed because Kevin refused to accept a public defender who had been assigned to him. And then, other administrative issues arose. Litzy's father, who attended every hearing, watched as the process dragged on longer and longer, and this situation was repeated on several occasions. In the end, a new trial date was set for June 2023. But the debate couldn't start at this time either, because Kevin, for some reason, was not transferred from the prison to the court. Each delay was a very hard blow to the family, and left them with a feeling that they were never going to get justice. And it wasn't just the fact that at some point Kevin's defense, and he himself by his own means, tried to drag out the process, making it so hard to get to a trial. Litzy's family wasn't entirely satisfied with the investigation either. As I mentioned a moment ago, the young girl's father thought there were more people involved, and they themselves as a family and as a community had conducted some investigations. Supposedly they had made some progress that they wanted to show the public prosecutor's office, but they always refused, which is why they requested a change of prosecutor in a proceeding, but this request was rejected. In addition to that, the community in general also expressed their discomfort with the fact that Kevin was in a prison called Matamoros, a privileged prison associated with politicians, businessmen, and influential figures. But although Litzy's relatives expressed this discomfort, they were told that nothing could be done about it. The decision to keep Kevin in that prison had been made by the judge handling the case, and it was to protect his safety. So the months went by, and these months turned into years, and Litzy's family, specifically her father, said in several interviews that they felt very tired and very frustrated with the fact that the trial wasn't starting. All the evidence was there, and they simply wanted to have justice and be able to close this chapter of their lives and move forward, honoring the young girl's memory. It wasn't until January 2026, 5 years after the events, that the trial finally began. During its opening statements, the prosecution argued that Kevin's crime had been carefully planned. Among the evidence presented was the forensic report. Litzy had multiple injuries and signs of having been forcibly subdued. But that wasn't all. The experts also concluded that she had been the victim of a sexual assault. The calls recorded during the extortion were also heard. In them, the family insisted that they were going to gather the demanded money, but that they couldn't do it quickly because they didn't have enough resources. On the other hand, it was the defense's turn, and they wanted to change the focus the prosecution was giving to the crime, saying that someone else was responsible, that Kevin had nothing to do with it. But for the prosecution, there was enough evidence to blame him. The defense said there were other people who were also relatives of Kevin and Litzy who had participated in the events. Kevin himself denied having participated in everything that happened, and said that on the day the young girl's life was taken, he had been first at his mother-in-law's house, and then at his house. And on top of that, he also pointed to other people as responsible, specifically his brother and another cousin. Meanwhile, Kevin's attitude also drew attention. Several people pointed out that there was a huge coldness in his eyes during the hearings, even while the details of the attack on the young girl were being presented. In fact, on some television programs dedicated to analyzing the trial, behavior and body language specialists commented on the man's conduct, saying it was that of an emotionally distant person, with egocentric traits and a tendency toward aggressiveness. So, on May 27, 2026, the prosecution requested 112 years in prison for Kevin, 50 for kidnapping, 50 for taking Litzy's life, and 12 for the sexual assault. A month later, in early June 2026, almost 6 years after the crime, the decisive moment arrived. The court found him guilty, though only of the crimes of kidnapping and taking Litsy's life, not of abuse. The decision, however, was not unanimous. One of the judges issued a dissenting opinion in which she pointed out that, in her view, there were doubts about Kevin's responsibility and that the prosecution's case had several weaknesses. Even so, the court concluded that the evidence against him was more than enough. It was also said that the public prosecutor's office will continue to investigate to identify if there is anyone else who participated in the events. And additionally, all the physical and audiovisual evidence gathered during the process was made available. Finally, since the sum of the sentence exceeded the limit a person can spend in prison in Guatemala, where life imprisonment does not exist, it was determined that Kevin would be sentenced to 70 years in prison. Afterward, he was handcuffed and led away under custody. Litsy's relatives celebrated the conviction. In the end, after so many years, they could have a little peace of mind, since the person who had taken the girl's life was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. On the other hand, Litsy's grandmother continues to run that small family store, to which she dedicated so many hours. She has maintained that her granddaughter's absence hurts deeply, but she is trying to carry on with her routine with the same dignity as always. In addition to that, they are also constantly finding ways to keep alive the project that Litsy left unfinished. And it has been her father who has taken charge of maintaining the house, taking care of the place, and watering the plants she had chosen herself. Even the house was finally finished. And well guys, that's it for today's video. A very sad, very shocking case that took a long time to get justice. 6 years in which a family was searching and trying to do everything possible to make sure this person didn't walk the streets and spent the maximum amount of time in prison. There is no real timeline of events in this because Kevin, who is the only person who knows what happened at that moment, hasn't given one. He keeps saying he's innocent, so we won't really know what happened that morning with Litsy until he deigns to say what happened. Although, as you saw, he keeps saying he's innocent, so we probably will never have a version of the events. In the end, the important thing here is that this man is never going to walk the streets again. He is a danger to society. He is a person who, for whatever reason he committed this crime, is dangerous to everyone. If you found this video informative, remember to leave a like and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I update 3 or 4 times a week, and if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification every time I upload a video. And now, see you in the next case. Bye!